Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Employee Time Tracking for CoC and ESG Projects training. We really appreciate you taking time on this Friday afternoon to come talk about this topic. My name is Melanie Mondello, and I work for the Technical Assistance Collaborative, otherwise known as TAC, and I will be your presenter today. We have about 2 hours together. We'll take the time that we need to go over this topic. I really hope if you have any questions that you'll jump in with those questions. Use us as a resource today to demystify what you have to do for employee time tracking. And feel free to share any issues that you're having. We can brainstorm those as well. So, all right. So here's our agenda for today. It's small but mighty. As we talk about time tracking and employee time documentation, first thing I wanted to do is we're going to go over at a very high level the system elements. So what is this? What do you have to do to build the system? Then we'll get into some of the very specific standards and requirements of how you can build out your system, or probably proof the system that you already have against the standards to make sure you have everything you need. And then we'll do questions and wrap up with some resources. So today, as you know, we're on Teams. Again, we would like this to be as interactive as you need it to be to get the information that you need. So we do have everybody managing their own mute, unmute setting. So if you're not talking or asking a question, if you can go ahead and keep that on mute so people watching the recording later can get what they need. So I'm just going to jump right in. A lot of you may already know this, but I always like to do just a little bit of level setting about what it is specifically I mean by time and effort tracking. Like, what do we mean by tracking employee time? So when you're thinking about your time and effort tracking system, what the federal government means and what I mean as I'm talking to you today is it's a formal system that has accurate and effective recording of the work that your staff are doing to make sure that you are charging for specific costs that are eligible and getting compensated for those from your federal grants in a way that's going to last through any audit or monitoring you have. So time tracking is very important to be accurate, because if you don't get your time tracking right, if HUD comes to monitor later, a year, 2, 3, that can be a reason to recapture funds. And nobody on this call today would like that to happen. And this is your best defense against having money recouped because you don't have enough documentation to show all the hard work that we know your teams are putting in to prevent homelessness and provide housing for people with the CoC and ESG money. So that's what I mean when I think about time tracking. It's paperwork, it's systems, it's supporting staff about roles and responsibilities. It's working very closely with your finance department. So your project management staff, your project line staff, and your finance department. This is a team effort. When you're thinking about time and effort tracking, you can't do it within just one department. So when you're thinking about this time and effort tracking, these are the 3 kind of really high level things that you're going to need as part of your timekeeping system. Payroll, always helpful, right? We all want to get paid for the work that we're doing. For timekeeping systems, payroll is where HUD or other federal entities will look for what it is that you actually paid employees. What did you pay for salaries? How did you decide where to bill that information? Because your payroll is allocated to different projects based on your timekeeping system. The payroll element of your timekeeping system is mostly typically managed by your human resources department or staff and anyone who's doing personnel. So usually there's one entity within your agency that is tracking payroll. And payroll is typically decided by your finance team, what that system looks like. Sometimes it can have multiple functions, but most of the times it's more about tracking global hours that someone worked and paying them with weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, depending on what your system is, and then tracking that staff actually got paid, cashing those checks, and then billing that back to your particular project that incurred that cost. The second part of a system is your time and effort. And this is known, we'll talk a lot about this as your personnel activity report. Some people call it the PAR, but not many. You'll hear it. Activity report is another way that people talk about this. This time and effort is typically done at the project level. It could be department-wide, but typically it's within each department, like your housing department or your service department, depending on who is funded by your CoC or ESG program grant. This time and effort log, it matches your payroll hours, but it goes a step deeper. So if I work 40 hours a week, payroll will pay me whatever my agreed upon salary is for that based on my timesheet. My timesheet may or may not have the flexibility to have more details than just I worked 8 hours on Monday. Your time and effort log is really about digging deeper into what did you actually do? So what did you do on your Monday? Did you go to a training all day? Did you work on grant A as a case manager? Did you work on grant B? And maybe you were doing rental calculations for your housing program, something like that. So this personal activity report, it might be a timesheet that has more detail that payroll can use to pay salaries to staff, or it might be a system where you're documenting something that has more of a narrative feature. So you could have the date that you're working, the amount of time, and then a quick narrative about what you're actually doing. And we'll talk about that a lot more. The time and effort piece of it, that is usually a partnership between the human resources, HR team, and the project manager or the project director, depending on how you structure yourself. Time and effort reports, these personal activity reports, they are typically done by the project or managed by the project manager of the project that's billing the federal entity. But it's very important that both the project and HR know where those are kept and have access to them, depending on who is asked what questions during a federal monitoring, a local monitoring, or your own internal monitoring. So that is how you document what you're doing through those first two things. I worked this many hours, I paid people for the time, this is what I did with that time, this is why it's eligible and I should be reimbursed. Then we get to actually charging the cost to your grant. You're not doing this for free, you're doing it because it's the mission of your agency, but it does cost money and you want to be able to charge back to HUD the cost that you're incurring to do the project that your CoC, state, or other entities have funded you for. So in this third step, you have your accounting and finance department also coming in. So again, every agency really does their structure based on what they need. So these terms might be combined or separated to even more granular pieces in your agency, but these are just generally speaking, who's responsible for each of these pieces. So the key thing for you is to figure out like who does each one. Do you talk to each other? And how can you coordinate to have the leanest system you can that is still compliant with timekeeping requirements? So in that slide, we talk about cost objectives. I can't imagine, I'm happy if you're here, but I'm guessing we don't have a lot of finance directors or finance office staff with us today. So I just wanted to give you the kind of definition for what a cost objective is from the federal point of view. You'll see throughout this training references to 2 CFR 200, and that is an overarching set of regulations that the majority of federal programs uses to define a lot of their administrative functions. So when I say 2 CFR 200, that's not the Emergency Solutions Grant regulation. That's not the CoC, the Continuum of Care Program regulation. It's an overarching administrative super circular regulation that our regulations for our specific program point to. So that is where if your finance department's like, what do you have to do? Show me, right? Show me why we have to put in all this effort. A cost objective within 2 CFR 200 means a program, which could be your shelter or your housing project, a function, an activity, an award, a division, a contract, or a work unit for which the cost data are desired and for which the provision is made to accumulate and measure the cost processes, products, jobs, and capital projects. I don't know about you, but that's a lot of words that I'm like, tell me what those mean, tell me how to implement that. So that's what we're going to dig more into, but I wanted you to have the formal definition so you can share that back with your finance team or people that are coming behind you and they're like, what do we have to do? What did you hear about these timekeeping systems? So you have that reference. So for your time and effort system, to have a functional and lasting system that will last through turnover and through changes in your projects, you're going to need policies and procedures, right? We have a lot of turnover in our projects. We have a lot of people that move into different positions, and it's not always evident what people need to do to document their time and do their payroll and do the regular job that they were hired to do. So your policies and procedures are a really key part of your system. As a project manager or project staff, you may be developing some of those procedures for the activity logs, but a lot of the policies and procedures are going to live more in your financial handbooks or your overarching policies for your agency, because no matter how you're funded, everybody does a timesheet, right? Payroll is typically a global function of your agency. You also need to know, and this is both finance team and project team, what is eligible within the budget line items that the federal government gave you. So if you have an ESG project or if you have a CoC project, what did HUD fund you for? What did the CoC approve? And what are you implementing for each budget line item? Because those budget line items turn into sometimes the lines on your timesheet. Sometimes they turn into the lines on your activity reports. So it's really important that you know what is eligible in each budget line item so that you can set it up correctly, so that you're not having to go back later and readjust things 6 months after they happened to get things in the right place. You also have to know what's allowable. There's a lot of things in all federal programs that you can do, but there's different things that your CoC or your state ESG recipient have said that you can do. And within your agency, you've also made decisions about how you want to spend your CoC program ESG money. So knowing what HUD would allow and then knowing what you actually decided, which is the allowable, the eligible and the allowables, that's really important so that you can be clear with staff when you're training them and clear for whoever's helping you with monitoring internally and externally about how you define different terms. Of course, you've heard probably multiple times, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. This is the same thing as your clinical notes, right? Your financial tracking system, your documentation system has to be in place to capture the information about the time that your staff are putting in towards this program. So you're going to need a documentation system that's clear, understandable, and that you can train people on as they move through. This last bullet is where people really they skip this a lot about doing quality control. It's easy to get into the grind of the day. It's easy to assume that everybody just knows what they're doing. Everyone's been here for a while. But time tracking and activity logs are typically the first thing that people put to the side or back off on a little bit, because we are all here to help people, get housing, keep housing, come out of homelessness. So having a quality control system is really important to make sure that this is staying front of mind, because again, there's financial implications if you don't have the time and tracking, that your agency doesn't want to have that conversation with HUD at a later date. Quality control can be something as simple as a supervisor looking at activity logs and timesheets before they go in. It could be a quarterly review. It could be looking at supervision once a month, right? It doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be part of your active system so that things don't slide. You could have the best policy in the world, but if you're not actually following it, it doesn't help you during those monitoring efforts. So, we talked about a lot of details, a budget line item, eligible cost, allowable costs. So if you want staff to get this right, you're going to probably need a cheat sheet or a guide about what you mean by budget line items. and what you want in each specific budget line item. So I'm going to pick on the CoC program for a second. So the CoC program is allowed to do rental assistance to support housing units. But within rental assistance, there's certain things I can do and build to that, and there's certain things I can't do. So if I'm a new staff person and I see rental assistance, most people think, rightfully so, rent, right? That's what you do with rental assistance. But under the CoC program, you can also possibly, if it is in your project design, bill some staff time. But how would staff know what they're doing, right? Whether it's eligible for rental assistance, or maybe a rental assistance person's also a case manager. So how are they supposed to know on a daily basis? Should I bill my time to rental assistance? Should I bill my time to case management? Should I do project administration? Like, what is it that I'm trying, to do? So having that staff support of a guide and just a quick sheet about what you mean by budget line items and what costs should go where will be part of your quality control system and part of your training and onboarding. I have seen a lot of places as you get bigger and bigger, and hopefully you get more and more federal awards, the timesheets and the activity logs get busy, and there's a lot of information you need to fit on there. So a lot of places will take codes and they'll work with their financial department to set up codes. So project A will have a code, and maybe that matches into your accounting system. Maybe it's a code that you use just within your division or project team. But it's really important if you have codes that you have the code breaker. I've done lots of monitoring in my time, and I can't tell you how many times I pull a timesheet and I'm like, okay, this is great. It looks really detailed. Can you tell me, can I have the code breaker, right? So I know I can trace back these numbers to the sheet. And it can take some time for someone to find the code breaker, get it to me so I can continue in my monitoring. And I just think if we can't get it from me and the monitors that they are, like, how much do staff have access to that? How are you using that during your quality control? So really making sure that these training and kind of staff supports are in place is really important. And it's also important because, as you know, you've probably heard me say other trainings, HUD monitoring can be a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later. Your systems evolve, right? Codes change, finance systems change, your project and your departments grow and shrink depending on what your priorities are. So making sure that you have the codes that go with older systems is really important. So making sure you're archiving that in your electronic system, in your project management folder, however you want to keep things. Just really important that you have that, because best foot forward during any monitoring is you want to look confident and you want to be able to answer questions about the system that you actually set up. You probably see down at the bottom here, these are excerpts from a training that was done, I think it was last year or the year before, time and effort keeping best practices. This is a training that is up on the Rhode Island CoC website, and I have a link in the resource slide at the end of this presentation too. So if you want more details about setting up your system, so looking through that financial lens, looking through, the 2 CFR 200 lens, I recommend going and looking at that training video in partnership with this one. If you're more interested in the 2 CFR version or view of timekeeping versus what I'm going to go over today. So again, that link's going to be in the resource slide of this deck, and you will get these slides after the training. Okay, that was high level, but may have been a lot depending on where people are in their journey of thinking about time and effort keeping, whether you're new to this or not. So I'm going to pause and just see if there's any questions. Let me just pull up the chat. Should have said, if you have any questions, again, you're welcome to come off mute, or you're welcome to put something in the chat and we can get to it at the appropriate time. So I'm just going to pause and see if anyone has any questions or clarification. Okay. Well, again, don't be shy if any questions do come up. Okay, so that's the overarching view. You have this big system that is probably mostly set up within your agency, but now you need to drill down to, okay, what do I need to do with my daily time? What do I need to do within my team? How do I actually implement these time and effort logs? So let's jump into some standards and requirements. So here again, we have some of the 2 CFR 200 references, just so you have that in your back pocket for later if people want to know where some of this information came from. So for all timekeeping, and this is really for all costs that you are billing to your federal grants, but they have a reasonableness test and an allocable test. So reasonableness in 2 CFR 200 says, if in its nature and amount it does not exceed that which would be incurred by a prudent person under the circumstances prevailing at the time the decision was made to incur the cost. Again, these are regulations, that's why it is so formal. But reasonableness is a test for all of the costs that you're going to incur. And that includes your salaries, your billing of salary time to your CoC and ESG program. So this reasonable test is really important as you're thinking about gathering timekeeping and then charging it out. Reasonableness comes up in timekeeping because it's about how you set your salaries. It's about how you reimburse people, your benefits package, all of those types of things. So making sure that it's a reasonable cost. What I see come up here a lot for a challenge is that some people mistakenly think just because the CoC program might have extra money in the budget or you're creating a new project, that if there's money in the budget, you can pay above, right, kind of industry standards, or you can use the money because you have it. And that isn't reasonable typically to HUD. They want to pay the amount that the service, in this case, the staff time, is worth in your field of experience and the field that you're working in. So always making sure that it's a reasonable cost that is being billed through your payroll and fringe and all that. Allocable means that it is billable to a particular award that you got or those cost objectives, which typically, hopefully, tie back to your budget line items in your grant awards. So you need to make sure that any cost that you have in your timekeeping, if I again have 40-hour week, I have 40 hours, like where is it going? Is 20 hours going to grant A under rental assistance, maybe 10 hours is going to grant C, and then the other part of it is just general administrative time for my agency for other duties that I have. So really being able to show that the employee's whole time is allocable to a certain place and not making assumptions about that. So the requirements, this is people's least favorite part of timekeeping and logging, is it is required that anybody that is charging time to a federal funding source must track all, I should have underlined and bolded that, their working hours by the funding source. So that means if I, again, am a full-time employee working 40 hours a week, it's not enough just to track, let's say I'm half-time on a CoC program grant, and the other half of my time is foundation funded. Maybe that's another role that I have. It's not enough just to track my 20 hours of time that I am spending on my grant, my federal grant. I have to track my whole time as an employee so that the federal government can see that I'm not double billing, that if I work 40 hours, that 40 hours is spread across the appropriate sources that are paying for that salary. The time tracking for the non-federal forces can be simple, right? It might not have to be as much detail, but it still has to be part of either that payroll timesheet, if you're combining those together, or your activity log to be able to show your full work day and your full work week or pay period, depending on how you track things. Second bullet, I feel like I need to say this because again, it's sometimes not done. They have to be recorded by your agency. 10 years ago, that meant pen to paper. We were all doing a lot of paper systems and signing timesheets and shuffling them kind of around our agencies. Now that may mean you have an electronic system. You might use Paychex or ADP to do your time, your payroll. You might use an Excel or another database to do your activity logs. It just has to be recorded. And I should have put also, and you have to keep it. So don't get rid of it. Make sure it's part of the archiving that you do If you are closing a project or moving to a different system, make sure that you're keeping the records, your payroll records, your timesheets, your activity logs, and anything else that is supporting the staff time that you're billing to the federal entity. The last bullet is everyone's least favorite. Estimates aren't sufficient. Every year I monitor summary, and every year I find someone who is billing based on estimates or based on allocations that aren't tested against actual activity that folks are doing. So when you do your budget, I like to explain it this way. When you do your budget at the beginning of the year, you're going to estimate that Melanie is going to spend 20% of her time on the CoC project, and Sarah is going to spend 100% of her time in the CoC project. 6 months later, the real life happens to you and all of your agency functions. Maybe things switch. Maybe Sarah gets pulled in. Now she has 2 roles. Maybe now I'm 100%, right? Like things change very rapidly sometimes within our projects. So you can't bill based on estimates. You can set your budget based on estimates, right? You have to kind of know where you're going and what your plan is. So you can do good budgeting to make sure you have the money to support the things that you're putting into place. But when it comes to timekeeping and it comes to recording the hours, you have to record what actually happened, not what you hope happened. Again, in my monitoring time, I see a lot. I'll pull a timesheet and I'll look and I'm like, wow, I want their job every day. They spend 4 hours on project A and 4 hours on project B. And I thought that must be amazing to have such a perfect, delineated work life. But then you get talking to staff and it becomes quickly apparent that that is not how it works, right? Every day is based on client needs, different meetings, different functions that you have. So it's really important that you take those budget estimates and those allocations of what you thought would happen, and you're recording what's actually happening. And if you're doing any allocation costs, like 10% of something, has to be based on actual time worked. So you can't just assume it's all going to work out over the course of a year. That's a very common misunderstanding about timekeeping, is that it all balances, so it's okay. And that's not how it works. So the formal requirements in the 2 CFR 200 regulation are for documenting the compensation, like I talked about, those payroll records for personal services, the wages and salaries, and the fringe benefits. This again is where your finance department and your HR and your payroll department, they know how they bill these. They know how this is set up within your agency about where it's going to go. But when you're monitored, you should be able to say, like, our fringe benefits get billed here, or, this is how we handle those at our agency, those types of things. And again, it's worth restating that all time needs to be tracked for the person's work week or work time period, and it would be by funding source. And that again is so that you're showing HUD, like, yes, there's 40 hours, I'm billing you for 20, and this other 20 is going here. No one within any federal program wants double billing, and that's one way to assure that's not happening, that you're not charging them and somebody else for the same activity, because you can see very clearly how the hours break down into the budget and actuals through your financial management system. So here, again, is another excerpt from 2 CFR 200. It just goes into a little bit more detail about, like, so what do you mean? How do I actually do this? We aren't doing a full financial management training today, but if you do a full financial management training, there's a really good one on the HUD Exchange. They talk about internal controls, and internal controls are that quality control system, the monitoring system, making sure that there's something checking and verifying that the information on payroll, activity logs, all of that is accurate before you get to billing. So those internal controls are really important. Internal controls also make it so you're less likely to have fraudulent activities in your agency. So for time sheets and activity logs, it wouldn't be the same person reviewing all of those. So it'd be me as the staff person completing it, my supervisor or project director, however you set up your system, they would review it. I've seen some finance departments do just a spot checking on a quarterly basis, and then it would go to payroll, and then your billing team probably spot checks that also, just to make sure that, if Melanie's timesheet ends up in project A, and you're like, I've never seen it there before, does she really bill project A, or is it a typo, right? So you have multiple controls to make sure that there's less error and a little bit of protection from fraudulent activities in case somebody is trying to bill to the wrong area. Again, here, the 100%, the employee compensation, that payroll record, I should be able to trace that back through to the timesheets, through to your billing to show that I paid someone for their time, I billed HUD for the time, and I put that money into this project. So you should be able to trace through your system, both forwards and backwards, about what was paid out and what was tracked. Again, documentation, policies and practices. HUD will hold you to your own policies, right? They have some very general guidelines here that say you have to have policies. There's more detail about what financial management standards need to be that your finance team will know about. But if you have a policy, it's really important that you follow it. If your policy and practice is not working for you within the allowable wiggle room, it's important that you revise that and put an effective date going forward. So that way you're not held to a standard that you're no longer using for your staff. I've seen that as well. HUD will say, show me your process. We pull the process and we're like, we stopped that years ago. It's like, well, you said you would do it. What's your control now, right? It just opens up a bunch of questions. So making sure that you're keeping your local project policies and procedures up to date, and that if there's any changes in your financial management policy and procedure, that someone has checked, right, with your federal billing teams to make sure there's no conflict or that they didn't accidentally get rid of something that you need to be able to help your staff do the right thing. So any questions on that before I go just down to the next level of detail of talking about timesheets? And we're going to go through some sample activity reports. So within your system, you've heard me talk about payroll, activity reports. So at a minimum, usually people have at least 2 documents that are supporting their timesheet. So we can put in for payroll and get reimbursed as a staff person. And then your activity report, which is more the detailed documentation of what work you did by specific cost objective or budget line item. And depending on the role that you're playing, the personal activity report may also have a brief description of the work. So let's see, I already picked on rental assistance. I'm going to pick on case management. So across your projects, probably have a case management role. Under case management, you do a lot of different things. You might be doing kind of admin level stuff with like staff meetings and setting up systems. You're definitely meeting with participants and people who are eligible for your project. You may be transporting, you may be doing your annual service assessment. So it's really important in your personal activity report. That is where you would have a brief description of, might say, 60 minutes, client 1, 2, 3. We did applications for federal benefits, right? Just something really quick, a de-identified client number or code that you can trace back to a participant in case HUD or any other entity wants to see, like, okay, you said you were doing that. Can I see the case notes, right, for that area? So the personal activity report, again, it just drills deeper down into what you actually did for the day, not just that I worked for project A, not just that I worked for project A and I did case management. It's that I worked for project A, I did case management, and I did something that was eligible based on the regulations that I'm working under. Both of these things are created by the employee. The form is obviously created by the agency. You'll have a standard process, but the documentation on it is based on the employee's entry. And it's a really important process, part of the process, to make sure that someone is signing off on that. And I use the word approve versus signature very deliberately. So it has to be approved, your timesheet and your activity report, by someone who has direct knowledge of what your responsibilities are. So if Sarah and I are in completely different departments, I see Sarah in the office, but I don't know what Sarah does. I shouldn't be the one that is proofing and approving her timesheets and personal activity reports because I don't know what she does. I don't know how she's supposed to spend her time. I'm not part of that chain of communication about what her role is within the agency and within her project. And approved instead of signatures, like we used to say back in the day, is because you might have an electronic way to do that, right? It might be more of verification. Your agency may have come up with a different way besides signatures to paper and doing a lot of scanning to be able to say, yes, staff looked at this, they submitted it. Yes, the supervisor or staff with direct knowledge looked at this, and yes, we want to go forth, pay the staff person, and then it would go into the billing system for HUD. As you're thinking about your timesheets, these are the specific things that I've seen, specifically your field office in Boston and a lot of other field offices across the nation. These are the minimum things that they want to see on your timesheet. Again, I always feel like I say obvious things during these trainings, but it happens, right? Sometimes the employee name is missing. It's just assumed, or maybe someone forgot to write it, or who knows what happens. Like in the moment, you know what you're doing, you know who handed it to you, you know what's going on, but just kind of stepping back to make sure these things are in place on your timesheets is really important. So you need to know who you're billing, because then you can trace that again to payroll and back to billing. The pay period, again, it might seem really obvious to you within the system, but always step back and say, if I didn't work here, if it was my first day, would I know what the pay period is? Some of you might be weekly, bi-weekly is a really common one. Monthly is becoming more common. The dates of service, so that is right within the pay period, like which days are you billing? Some people work weekends, some people are weekdays. The CoC budget line item, if applicable, same for the ESG program, like which budget line item are you billing? Again, this, I'm talking about a timesheet. If your payroll system also is flexible enough to say like my timesheet is also going to be able to let me show like a little more detail into like which project and which budget line item I'm billing. So I can do one sheet for that and one sheet for my activity report. That may be something that's on your timesheet. It could be of a timesheet, and then you have that budget line item information somewhere else. The approvals I talked about, staff submitted it, supervisor or other, entity like that approved it. Specific specific hours broken out by program. Talked about the hours on the non-CoC, non-ESG activities. Any paid time off, leave time, don't leave that off of your time card, right? You have benefit time, I hope. You take that benefit time. And then last but not least, it has to add to 100%. This again is a very common issue if someone's still doing pen to paper, that it looks good, but if you're not taking time to add it up, sometimes it doesn't add up to 100%. You think you got everything, but in the rush of the day, time was left off, and like, who do you bill that to when you're going to do the billing at the end of the month? So making sure that whatever system you have, it adds to 100% of the person's time, whether part-time, 3/4 time, or full-time. The personnel activity report, that should have the date of the activity, a brief summary of the activity. This is where you can be creative and streamline things. You could have bullets people could check off. You could check boxes if there's core activities that people do. You could have check boxes so people aren't writing the same thing over and over again. You need to have the time spent on the activity, and it needs to have the program and or typically it's both the budget line item. A lot of you are working on multiple projects, and even if you're only working on one project, it is very rare, for better or worse nowadays, for people to have one hat. Sometimes you're, only filling the case management role, which is great. You can be focused and do that. But a lot of times people are doing multiple roles. They might be helping with reporting and doing case management. They might be doing housing activities and some type of supportive service, outreach, transportation, things like that within the agency. So it's important that you have those budget line items, because otherwise everyone knows which project to put it to, but your finance department can't track which budget line item. And if you can't track the budget line item, when you go to pull your money down from HUD, you don't know which line of credit to pull it from, right? And then your payments are delayed, which nobody wants either. So that personnel activity report is really important to kind of, again, go into the details about what you did. I tend to see activity reports that also have, like I said, the client like a de-identified code to be able to track back to clients. So you can show that the clients that you worked with that you billed to project A are actually in project A. You can trace back to, I worked with this client and here's the case note for what I did, or here's the assessment that we completed together, or the federal application, whatever it is that you were working on. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to show you some samples. And if you have any questions, please jump in. Let me just stop sharing this for a second. I'm going to exit out of the PowerPoint and just show you some quick samples of different ways you could do the documentation. And for the second sample I'm going to show you, I want you to be thinking about whether it's a good sample. What would you do different? What do you like? What doesn't work for you? So let's start with, I'm going to start with a document that is more of an example of a timesheet payroll submission combination. So let me get back to Teams. I'm going to share this. Hopefully that, yeah, it looks like it showed up. So this is an example of a monthly employee timesheet. And from a quick scan of it, this looks like someone who works on one project. Oh, no, two projects, right? I have two grants down here. This is a CoC example. So you can see here, I have, right, all the elements that I talked about that we want to be there. This was an electronic version. We look like it's doing some calculation for us, but it has different line items. These are the budget line items that are in their CoC program that they might be playing a role in. So this person does a lot of different things. And it looks like I see operating here twice, operating and operations. So they probably work on two separate grants. So this particular example is probably a spreadsheet or an electronic system that somebody built that, based on the codes and how things are entered, it sums up, right? It shows each day how many hours people are working. People can do multiple things, run multiple hats during their day, just kind of put their time in here. And then it will all add up here. Your finance department, your project director, whoever has the pleasure, will be able to take these and quickly know like where I'm going to bill them, which grant, how are we like moving this information into the reimbursement stage for the federal program. You can see this example, it doesn't have anything about what I did. It just says that I did supportive services. There's, I think, 14 supportive services that CoC grant specifically covers. So, which supportive service, right? What did I do that day? Was it staff meeting? Was it working directly with clients? Was it something else? That's an eligible cost. This is where, this is the timesheet. This is how the agency would know how much to pay me for that time period. And then my activity report would be able to support this. So this is kind of that first level. And then the second level would be the activity report. So I can stop sharing so I don't make you dizzy. I'm gonna pull up a sample activity report. This one's called the daily activity log. Okay, you should see a Word document that came up. So I'm gonna walk you through this, but I want you to think about the things I've told you about: traceable, understandable, right? If you're a new employee or if you're a new manager trying to like figure out what's going on. So I'll kind of walk you through the elements here. And for any of you that have been doing this for a while and are feeling brave, maybe you can tell me what kind of my trouble spots are in this particular daily activity log, or places where I might be prone to error or not quite as tight and foolproof a system as I might want. So in this daily activity log, I have the date of August 3rd. So Jane worked on August 3rd. Jane as an employee has a lot of stuff going on, lots of different roles, works across, I see here, 2 projects. So time is evenly split between the 2 projects. That's good, right? Definitely possible, not always probable during a day. Their agency tracks by 15-minute increments, which is totally fine. So I can see here, this is the prep. So this day, this project, she was prepping for her day. She was looking over all of those notes, trying to figure out kind of like what was going to happen for the day, getting oriented to any new information that came in. Had some client interaction, did case notes, right? Documentation is absolutely an allowable cost that you should be billing to your federal grant, unless you have some other way to pay for that within your agency. This was a no-show, so still billed the time. Got caught up on notes, probably rescheduled, did some outreach either by phone or email, however they're contacting their clients. You can see here we have a meeting. This was everybody, so it says all. Here we have a crisis. Again, you're all very responsive to the people that you're working with. So when met the client did that, thankfully got a break for the day, talked to the supervisor, got a call from the shelter, had a group meeting. Okay, so here we go. We're meeting with the other project. And then again, some questions. So 480 hours, this should be minutes. So I'll just own that mistake. Sorry, 480 minutes, not hours. Oh, then I have Ray House hours, I have Star House hours, and I have leave. So leave is more this administrative, right? This is lunchtime. So I'm going to be quiet for a second, and I love if someone feels brave to come off mute, tell me what you would do differently if this was your activity log. Tell me if you can come up with the same numbers that I came up with. You can also put it in the chat if you don't feel like coming off mute. That's totally fine. What do you see here? If you were the supervisor, how would you know how much time I spent with people at the Star House? Okay, thank you, Victoria. No evidence of which grant was charged for some line items. Exactly. So this particular, the way it's documented right now probably makes total sense to people who are in the moment and know these clients. But if I looked at this a year later, it would take me a bit, right? Because I know for sure, right? Here's 60 minutes. Easy, easy. The rest of it, I would have to start adding up, like, I wonder where ER is. I have to go look up that one. MH, I wonder, like, maybe that was there's a lot of tracking and tracing. If I was the federal auditor or CoC monitor, or even just your own auditing team, they'd be like, so tell me where this person, which client, like which program does this person work at? What else do you see? And you can tell me things you like about it too, but what else do you see that you're like, it doesn't really match the things that she just told me need to be there? Or places that maybe it's like prone for error. Another improvement in the chat is suggest implementing, yes, eligible activity line or budget line items and a sign off. Yes, so just some initials or a sign off section would be helpful here. Again, this assumes, like, I'm looking at this, I've been doing this for a while, so I'm going to say this person's all case management role and works at 2 projects, but that's an assumption, and I can make that based off of my experience working in federal programs. A monitor may not be able to make that jump, right? You're going to have a lot of explaining to do. You never want to explain. You just want to do your best to get it documented, have it here. So you could have a different column that is a drop down. It says supportive services. For my activity logs, if you were doing one electronically, I would have it say case management, outreach, transportation. Like, don't stay at that high supportive service level, because then you'll have to like go down to a different level for your billing and reporting. So you could have a column that has the budget line item. Anything else that folks see that you're like, ooh, that would be really hard in 6 months to figure out, or actually put on a supervisor hat. I'm your amazing staff person. I did all my job. I've documented. I give this to you. It is your job for your 20 employees to look these all over and get them to payroll so that I can get paid. As a supervisor, how easy is your job in proofing this? If I was a supervisor and I had 20 employees, and I had this, my calculator would be very busy, right? I have to add up because it looks like it doesn't have any totals. It's a table that's in Word, not in Excel. So I'm going to have to, as a supervisor, trust or do all the adding, right? Add this up. Is it 480 minutes? Is 480 minutes 8 hours? I don't know. Like, right? You're gonna have a lot of work as a supervisor on that Friday afternoon or Monday morning, whenever your timesheets are due, to do your due diligence before you turn it in. If you don't have enough time to do your proofing, you may pass it along. It doesn't get caught, then you have to either go back and fix it, or it's going to get caught on a monitoring, which again is not what you want to see. So this particular log has some of the elements that we need, but it doesn't answer all the questions. So what I would challenge you to do is take your system that you have in place. You have the information that you got here today. Take the slide, take your system, and see if you can answer the questions. See if it makes sense, as if you were explaining it to someone who hasn't done federal programs for a while. If you were onboarding a new supervisor to have to meet with this, like, and what could you simplify, right? Your staff may be able to tell you, make sure you're talking about it at staff meeting, like, hey, is there anything I'm making right twice? Because sometimes people, they just get used to it, and maybe you made so many improvements that you actually started duplicating information, right? You don't want to do that either. You need to do what you need to do for the project, but you don't want your staff spending all their time on their activity log. Okay, anything else that people want to share about this particular example? The last thing I'd say is the date. I don't know what year this is, right? Again, you could be looking back a very long time. This gets shuffles, it falls out of a packet, like making sure it's just really clear about what is being documented. So I'm just going to stop sharing. I'm going to go back to the slides and pull those up. Any questions before I talk a little bit about billing and what that looks like? Okay. Let's jump briefly into billing, and then I will open the floor for any additional questions or more information that you want that I might not cover in this last section. Okay, so billing. We've talked about this throughout. You're doing hard work, you're doing good work, you got an award. We definitely need to bill that out to HUD. So as you're thinking about your timesheets, they're usually the bulk of the costs that are on your monthly invoices. And I'm assuming you're all doing monthly because that's the best practice. So on your monthly invoices, typically either your project manager, director, in partnership with your finance team, is compiling that monthly invoice and then putting it into the HUD system to draw out money based on your award. So in your monthly invoice, you're going to have the timesheets, which again, we kind of looked at a few examples. It could just be payroll information. It could be payroll plus some budget line items, depending on how your system's set up. You're definitely going to have the timesheets in the invoice system, or be able to get them easily if I ask you to give me a monthly invoice packet, signed or again approved, right? Interchangeable now that we're mostly electronic, showing that the timesheets were reviewed internally. Actual hours worked. I'm going to do a quick proof that, it's not all the same. It's not perfect 444 if I'm within 2 projects and every day is exactly the same. The payroll company, so basically there's usually like a cancel check that shows which company is paying or which software is paying out the check to the employee. And there's a way within your system to show that that was cashed. And then the billing sheet that summarizes all this. So your billing sheet is most likely in this case going to be the top. And on it, I might see Sarah, Melanie, John, and underneath, I'm going to be looking for 3 timesheets. I'm going to be looking for those activity logs that support the timesheets. And I need to be able to it doesn't have to be in my invoice packet, but I need to be able to get to and show me that you paid Sarah, and show me that you paid Melanie, and show me that you paid them, then build them to this particular HUD grant. HUD doesn't always go to that level of detail, but I like to tell people they have the right to go to that level of detail. So they can say, show me that you paid Sarah, and show me that Sarah cashed the check and that you didn't get it back because she never cashed it, if it's not a direct deposit situation. So it's really important, even if it's not in your invoice packet, that within your agency, you're able to pull that level of information. So for the case manager, which obviously, sorry, I'm picking on all the case managers, but their role is just really a good example for federal billing. For the case manager, I'm going to have the timesheets, I'm going to have the payroll, I'm going to have their billing sheet. I'm going to have their activity chart, log, personal activity report, right, whatever you're calling it, and the case notes. So that is a piece that is not in the federal register. It's not in the federal regulations. It's implied, which is not very helpful when you're putting a system together, but that's why you're here today. So specifically within the HUD programs, they want to be able to drill down to not only did you do case management, but what did you do? Unfortunately, there's been fraud. People have done things they're not supposed to do with these federal funds. And so there's just additional documentation. And this is where that activity chart or activity log is really key. Because if you can imagine a year from now being like, okay, show me who you worked with for this week 2 years ago without an activity chart or activity log. Maybe your electronic record could do that, maybe not. You definitely can't do it with paper records. Then you're looking through charts, you're trying to, backtrack and find all of that time and effort in your paper charts, and it just takes up a lot of energy. So having those case notes, HUD again doesn't always go there, but they have the right to say, hey, Melanie billed an hour here. Can you show me what she did? Like, what activity did she do? Was it something that we consider eligible as a case management activity? Is it something that we consider eligible as an outreach or needs assessment or transportation activity? So those case notes are required. They're not typically in your invoice package, but it is backup to that. So making sure that they all tick and tie. As a supervisor and as an agency, you need to figure out how often you're going to proof your case notes to your activity logs and your timesheets. In a perfect world, you're going to be doing case notes every day, writing them before you leave. It's all right, tidy. We don't live in a perfect world, but you should have some type of a system to make sure that those case notes are getting done and getting done in the place that you need them to be. So there's continuity of care for the people that you're serving, and we're here because you want to get reimbursed so that you can get reimbursed and keep that money if you're ever monitored or audited by HUD. This kind of loosely matches back to that example that I showed you about Jane Doe, who works for 2 different programs and got a break. So that's good. She got lunch. Here I talk about some other ways that you might be able to document Jane's time. I talked about the activity chart or, activity log, personal activity report, that version. With caution, I say that you could also possibly use your Outlook calendar if you are very diligent, you have an agency-wide system that is very clear on how people need to keep their work calendar in Outlook. That could be what your activity log or chart is if there's enough information there to support the elements that we've talked about. In my 20 years of doing this, I've seen it work twice. I've seen it not work a lot of times. So I'm not saying it's not possible. You have to make sure that you have really good policies internally if you're going to use your Outlook calendar system as your logs. You need to have a way to make it standardized, right? So anybody can read it. You need to have a way to archive those so they're not lost if an employee leaves. Like, how are you printing them, storing them, PDFing them, whatever it is? You could have an electric timekeeping system that has enough detail, right? There are some of them out there. Again, not what I've seen mostly for the activity charts. I've seen, again, probably like 1 or 2 that go to that level of detail. And so you can have one of the 3: activity chart, calendar, if you're really regimented, timekeeping, if you have a really great flexible system, and case notes. So just kind of really prove what you're doing for those services. If there's any documentation you need to do to say what it is that you did for that time period beyond what is in your activity chart. So you heard me say earlier, we can't just bill based on assumptions, right? We can't say like, I'm pretty sure like Melanie's going to work 60% of her time here and 40% of their time there. But there are some positions in your agency where you can't say they're part of a specific program, but they do a activity, part of their job duties is something that your CoC or ESG programs sees as billable to a very specific budget line item. It's not indirect, or your agency doesn't treat it as indirect costs. It's not overhead. It's not project administration. So there are some times and some positions that you may have allocated staff time where you're saying a portion of these person's worked hours are going to go here and here. But that is based on still some logging, right, of what they're doing. And most importantly, it's based on this allocation plan. So at your agency, you should all have a cost allocation plan. You might hear it talked about as like a CAP, cost allocation plan. Within your agency, you should have a document. It can be brief. Sometimes they're very long, sometimes they're very short. That says, for our agency, cell phones are going to be treated this way. For our agency, the staff space that they have is going to be billed this way. It's going to be billed by square foot. It's going to be billed by, percentage of building, like whatever it is. So you might have an allocation plan that talks about that. So for this particular example, this was an operating program. So they have maintenance staff, someone in a janitor position who is shoveling snow for all the participants, right? They're not going to write down shoveled snow for apartment A, shoveled so, right? They're not going to write that down. It's the whole project. So they would be allocated based on the whole building of what they're doing. If that building is shelter on the bottom and maybe CoC program rental assistance apartments on the top, again, they don't have to write down like shoveled this door, shoveled that door. It may be a 40-60 split. It's based on whatever your cost allocation plan is. Is it based on square footage of the building? Is it based on the percentage of the project that's in that building? Whatever you come up with that you can support and that is reasonable and that is applied consistently, that is possible. Again, a lot of your time is not going to be allocated based on these percentages, but there are some spaces where you're going to say, Melanie worked 8 hours. She really works across all these projects. We do quarterly checks on that. Like we're going to bill 2 hours out of each. But with caution, if this is 80% of your billing, something is probably not being done right. Some of you may have contractors. There may be services that you don't do within your agency. You bring in people from the outside. So these are just some examples of that. Some people bring in kind of maintenance pieces if they have a project-based CoC project or shelter. It might be that, you bring in like specialty services, plumber, electrician. Sometimes people bring in people to do inspections that are required by the CoC program. If you're doing contractors and you want to bill their time to your federal grants, very similar things to what you have to do as employees. Number of hours, hourly rate, being able to clearly delineate like which program they're charging to. So grant code, the budget line item. You could set up an invoice template and say, here it is, and they can have drop downs and kind of fill that out. You would put sometimes that information of what you're going to expect on your bills in whatever contract you have. I've seen it as an addendum of like, here are the elements I need to be able to bill. If it is unit specific, definitely have them put that in so you can get it to the right project. You might have multiple housing projects and someone is doing inspections for 3 different projects within one day. The specific activity they're doing, again, that little, inspection or whatever it is that they're doing for you. So very similar. It just may look different because it could all be in an invoice document instead of the multiple like timesheets and activity logs and case notes that we see on our side of things. Okay, I'm going to leave this up so you can kind of look at it while I check for any questions. We're in the home stretch here. Thank you again for a Friday afternoon talking about timesheets with me. I'm going to wrap up by going over some of the common monitoring findings. And again, most of the things, everything I share is based on things I've seen. So please know it does happen. It can happen to you. There's a lot of turnover. Some of these rules don't make a lot of sense or people just don't like them, which is totally fair, but we have to do it if we want to get reimbursed and stay reimbursed. So before I go into this, are there any questions or things that folks want to bring up? Okay, I don't see any. Okay, so common monitoring findings. Every couple years, I'm like, I'm going to update this slide because people are doing this now, right? People are just doing timesheets now. But unfortunately, this continues to come up as a very common monitoring finding. I was just working with a West Coast state this year, and I thought, oh no, like HUD was coming to visit, and we were looking at their time distribution and their costs, and I thought, oh no, like this is not going to make it. So we were going through calendars and trying to like come up with the support for all the hard work that you could hear it in what the staff were saying, but you couldn't see it in paper. Like everyone knew it happened, but there was no written proof that they had done all the hard work that they said because the case notes had fallen off, right? The timesheets and the activity logs, where are they? I don't know. They were here, but where's the folder? You know, those types of things. So what HUD is seeing is that people aren't documenting, again, the specific hours worked. There's still people that are billing based on those budget estimates. And again, it's absolutely something you need to do as part of your process, but it's not how you can bill HUD. You have to make sure those estimates are coming into reality. If you're brave and really organized, you could check that on a quarterly basis if people's jobs are really that stable and you think things don't change a lot. But again, in my 20 years of doing this, I haven't seen that work well for people. It usually falls apart at some point when there's turnover, and then the agency's really stuck trying to prove why they're billing assumptions versus actuals because they forget to do their monthly or quarterly reconciliation. So not documenting that people are actually working on specific days and what they're doing, not having a review system for timesheets. Again, they're going to hold you to your policy, which probably says that you do that. Staff time records, it doesn't show, they can't trace it to a person, right? It says that you were with clients all day, but there's not a note to be found. I can't see anything in the chart showing like anything that you've worked with clients, whether it's a large program or a small program, not being able to say like, and this is who I served and this is what we did is a big problem that HUD sees often. Sometimes it shows that I billed for 20 hours, but when I pull the timesheet, it says 8 hours. So you can again see that like mismatch between the budget assumption and the record that the staff did. It didn't flow through the system. So I did my documentation on my activity logs, gave it to my supervisor, but somehow it just didn't match into payroll. And when you come to another thing they're seeing, and this is more of like your partnership with your finance department, is the fringe, kind of all your benefits, your health insurance, possibly vacation time, all of that that your agency might offer. Those are still estimates. They're never reconciled to actuals. I'm not going to speak deep to that because your finance department knows how to do that. But just making sure that at the end of the day, like that your fringe costs are based on what actually goes out the door for your agency and not estimates. So again, it's just proving what you're doing. It's making sure that it makes sense all the way through. It's making sure if I have a billing sheet that says I have 4 employees, I have 4 timesheets. It's making sure that if I have 2 employees on my billing sheet, that I have 2 timesheets and not 4, right? You want all the numbers to kind of flow through. So if math isn't your thing, find the person on your team who loves math and definitely involve them in this process. That is what I have for you today. So we definitely will pause for questions. Like I said, here's some general resources. Here are specific resources. There is a Rhode Island CoC recipient toolkit, and the hyperlink is here. It's on your CoC program website. There's the link to the webinar that Rex and I did. Again, it's last year or the year before, that really thinks about this more from setting up your agency systems with that 2 CFR 200 rule lens versus the kind of project level view that I took today. You have your general CoC program homepage, which I think has been recently launched again this year. It has CoC resources, it has ESG resources, it has training videos based on the trainings that have been hosted this year, and that's where this recording will go if you need to onboard someone later. So those are the resources. I thank you for coming today. You're a quiet group. I hope that means like this all makes sense. But do you have any questions? I'm just gonna look over into the chat and see. Okay, I see a question. Are budget estimates allowable for admin costs? Do admin staff need case notes in a timeline? That is a great question. Thank you for asking that. So I'm going to speak to kind of admin as a general term. Project administration is an eligible CoC program cost. It has very specific things. Within your federal grants, you need to know what that particular funder thinks admin is. Sometimes they have a very broad view of it. Sometimes they have a very narrow view of what administrative costs are, and whether they're agency admin or project admin is a big distinction. So typically, no, there's no budget estimates that are allowable for these things. It has to be actual time worked. And the reason for project administration that is painful but does make sense is because it's for very finite activities, especially within the CoC program. And general people that are in that administrative function typically are doing much more than the three kind of overarching buckets of activities. So yes, the project administration under the CoC program would have to be, it should be actuals. What you want to do is find the person who's doing the most of those things and bill that person, or do like that quarterly reconciliation. Admin, project administration, you don't need case notes because there are very specific things. It would be more clear on your timesheet. And I would look to your job description, right? To see like one of your jobs is CoC or ESG reporting duties. One of your jobs is providing CoC or ESG training, that type of thing. So for project administration, typically I've seen HUD accept it's just either that payroll / budget line item or payroll and then your kind of more detailed pay slip, not having to go down to the activity log. The activity logs I've seen more for the services where you're going to have those case notes. It's part of your practice to document more, like for transportation, you would have a transportation log, those types of things. I hope that answers that question. Second question, can direct supervisors charge to supportive services, or do they need to be admin? Which again, I'm gonna make the leap based on what I know of the project that you're talking about, CoC program, project administration. There's a whole training on project administration versus indirect. If you want to, in your spare time, go ahead and watch that. It's up on the Rhode Island CoC website. So can direct supervisors charge supportive services line item, or do they need to be project administration? So again, it's right in the regulation for either of your programs on what they think each one is. If you are a direct supervisor of someone doing a thing that is allowed by either ESG or CoC, your time is supporting that activity for the moments that you're talking about that with your staff person. So the supervisor can be built into your budget and be billed to the project line item that your staff person is doing. Here again, the question is always how. How do I show that that was my time, that it was spent? Maybe I am the project manager, I supervise an entire case management team. How am I going to show why I'm billing supportive services? Your supervision log is typically how I see people if they're going to bill that to their federal grant. The supervision log, which doesn't maybe have the details about what you and I talked about, but just has kind of time and when we met. That's how I've seen that supported. It's also important as a supervisor, you may be talking about specific project things. The person may be working on two different projects by two different funding sources, federal, not federal. So kind of seeing like let's say hour supervision, how much can I bill to the HUD project? It depends on how much time you spent. So you may have an hour-long supervision, and when you're looking at it and thinking about what you did with the person, maybe a half hour of it is directly billable to the project grant. The rest of it was based on something else, right? It was talking about something that was not HUD grant related. Good question. Do you have an example of what you would consider a perfect activity log? That is always the question I get during this training. And my answer is no, because every time I come up with a perfect example, people edit it. because your system of how you manage your team and how your payroll and HR and project manager, how you all need to talk to each other is different. So is there like a base, right? Like I could probably find like a baseline spreadsheet, but what I've usually found is people have to edit it right away. The first thing they do is start moving stuff around, breaking formulas, that type of thing. So it's not about like the perfect format because you don't want HUD to tell you that because you want the freedom to come up with a streamlined, as easy as possible system to do this task that everybody hates and just supporting them through those feelings and getting to the other side of doing the documentation. So no, there isn't a perfect one. It's more about the elements and can you trace it through? Okay, can you please repeat, confirm the admin staff don't need the activity log? Yes, so for project administration, if we're talking CoC program, project administration, again, I'm not HUD, I should have said that at the beginning. I'm Melanie from TAC. I'm here as an expert in this subject matter, but I am not HUD. But what I've seen them accept in the past is the timesheet with the specific budget line item detail, right? Which again, may be the same as your payroll, maybe a second timesheet or more detailed backup sheet and the job description showing that that's what you do. So showing that that's a primary duty about what you're doing. So if you need to, if you, again, I've been doing this for 20 years, I get a little paranoid about these things. What I tended to do when I was in your shoes is I would block it out in my calendar and just say like, annual performance reporting for grant, right? I just show a little block. So that way, if I really did spend 6 hours, which is entirely possible on your annual reporting, if someone wanted you to prove it, you could go back and do that. So it's more of a practice, not a requirement. So if you ever have any questions, of course, you could always ask. I tell people if you're going to ask HUD, make sure you're willing to live with the answer. So sometimes it's better to be consistent and explain your process and change it if they ask. Sometimes it's better to ask the question and make proactive changes. So it's always a bit of a judgment call. So other questions or topics or clarification that I can help with about time tracking or processes? And
So
feel
yeah,
free to come
Melanie,
off mute. Yeah.
sorry. So I do completely understand what you're saying about not having the perfect template because then people are going to edit it for their specific needs within their agency.
Yeah.
But it would be awesome to just have the visual representation of all of the elements that you're saying are necessary to have within activity log.
Yeah.
To just have the because like I see your words, I see your bullets, and but then having the like example of what it looks like in kind of in real life on a sheet is super helpful. Again,
Absolutely.
not to say that it's going to be copied exactly to your point.
Yeah.
But that it would be like, okay, it has this element, it has this element. I see what you mean to visually have the visual representation is what I mean.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I can get you some samples.
Cool.
Also in that toolkit, there are some samples in there. So I think they're, I don't think they're in the appendix. I think they're in, if you pull down the PDF and you search timekeeping or timesheets, you'll see some samples pulled up there. And you also have so many peers within Rhode Island who are doing this. Their systems may work better than something that I share that was from somewhere else. But I will get some examples and there'll be a big disclaimer of this. I do not promise that this is going to get you through. You definitely would have to match it to your system and what else you do. And if there's any peers here who love their system or love at least 80% of it and want to share it out, I think that's also really useful because you know within Rhode Island, like what other funders are expecting of you. You're funded by state ESG, you're funded by federal, like you have multiple masters as you're setting up your payroll tracking system. But yeah, I'll get you some samples.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, question. When reviewing billing, you mentioned the importance of documenting the proof the person accepted the payment, caching, direct deposit. What documentation would you see? Okay, great question. Thank you for clarifying that. So when you're doing your monthly invoices, we all assume that payroll happened and that employees got paid. People find out pretty quickly if people aren't, getting their checks. And again, if you're still in a place where people are getting a paper check and they're having to cash that, that's where this comes in a lot more. Frequently, if you're doing direct deposit for all employees, it's a little easier. What I would do here is I wouldn't put it as part of your monthly invoice every month, but what I would do is make some time with your finance department, take an invoice and just trace it through so you know what that looks like. Like, okay, here I have on my invoice, Melanie worked 20 hours. Can we sit down with the finance payroll people and like, let's just see if I could show that thread that says I billed HUD for 20 hours. Melanie got paid for 20 hours, right? I'm going to have typically a pay stub that just says I got paid for 40, but then I'm going to be able to back it up to the payroll and the, where it went in the finance system. So that's going to look different for everyone because people set up their finance systems the way they need to. So I wouldn't, it's not going to be the W-9. It's going to be the actual, that pay period, that billing. So again, this is more of know where to get it and make sure it exists, that you can draw the line versus putting it in your monthly packets. You don't have to be that level of paranoid with me or prepared. We'll call it prepared. Just make sure that it is possible within your system and that you know what the path is. Because again, we all could leave our jobs for positive or not positive reasons, and you don't want that knowledge to get lost. So I hope that helps. Thank you so much for all your questions on a Friday afternoon. This was great. Any other questions? What I would suggest is, again, thank you so much for coming. What I'd like to do is we're going to stop the recording now so we can get that posted. And I'm going to stay on for a few minutes if there's questions that people would like to ask and get answered offline. So Sarah, thank you so much for having me do this. Thank you for allowing us to talk about timesheets, everybody's favorite topic, and the recording and the slides will be posted. You'll also be getting a survey to just tell us feedback on the training if there's any other topics that you want to hear about based on your project needs. So we will wrap up the official training there, stop the recording, and then I'll stay on for a little bit.
Thank you, Melanie.